Hi Year 11, this is a short video to give you some notes for the first part of Act 1, Scene 2. You'll find that on page 13 of your copies of Romeo and Juliet. This is where Shakespeare introduces us to Lord Capulet and Paris, and we also learn the first few important details about Juliet. There are also the development of various themes. We find out about attitudes towards love and marriage, which are very important to understand the play. How that links into class, wealth and status, something very important to all of these upper class characters. How traditions were used in Verona which contribute to events later, and also just the relevance of Juliet's gender and age and how these two men talking about her view her because of those details. So it would be great if you had 3 different colours for highlighters. I'm going to ask you to make notes for AO1, AO2 and AO3. In year 10 we certainly try to use a key for those different objectives with 3 different colours, so if you could just assign a colour to each of these 3 AOs for the notes that I'm going to ask you to make. Thank you. Just a few lines that we're going to be making notes on. I won't read this to you. If you could just pause this video now and read what happens in the scene. Okay, so it's not action packed, there's no fighting or anything like happened in the previous scene. But it's very important after the big dramatic explosive starts that we just get to know some key characters who are going to be very relevant later. It's also important to understand this scene, particularly the character of Paris and what he's after, to understand some basic context. So here are some notes that are going to be useful. Just pause the video again and read what I've got on this slide, please. Come back when you're ready to start making your highlighting annotations. Okay, so I hope you've got page 13 ready. I'm just going to start reading. I'm going to do my character voices here. So we're in Verona in a public place and enter Capulet, Paris and Capulet's servant behind.
But Montague is bound as well as I, in penalty alike, and 'tis not hard, I think, for men so old as we to keep the peace.
Of honourable reckoning are you both, and pity 'tis you lived at odds so long. But now, my lord, what say you to my suit?
But saying over what I have said before, my child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen the change of 14 years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her ripe to be a bride.
Younger than she, a happy mother's maid. So we get the impression that Paris and Capulet have already been having a conversation about the fights that happened earlier. We've got Capulet saying that really him and Montague are both being threatened with punishment if they continue to allow this to happen. And Capulet, given that the last time we saw him, he was this old man demanding his sword and wanted to have a fight with another old man. It's interesting that he's actually coming across as quite reasonable and kind in front of Paris. Maybe he wants this guy, Paris, to see the best of him, to see that he's a good guy. Paris also seems to be grovelling a little bit there, saying, oh, well, both you and Montague are great guys. It's a shame that you don't get on. So it's interesting contrast with what we saw in the previous scene. I think we should make a few notes for AO1 here now. So the first thing there at the top of the lines, on line 3, which is interesting, is that we see the theme of age be mentioned. Capulet says that him and Montague are both old men. It's a reminder that Capulet is very old, and therefore perhaps unable to relate to his much younger daughter. Juliet's age comes up a little bit later on. She's not even 14 yet, and given what happens in the story, that might be relevant. The next thing to make a note on is the first lines of the character Paris. Paris is not one of the major main characters, but obviously what he represents, like the other option for Juliet, is very important. It helps us appreciate her passionate love for Romeo when we see that actually she does have another option. She could go for the more obvious choice of the wealthy, good-looking, clever man Paris, her parents' choice. So we see that Paris is very respectful. He doesn't want to take sides. That's an attractive quality. I think this guy is an honest character, but also we know that he really wants to marry young Juliet, so he needs Capulet to see that he's very respectful. I should have said this. Do pause the video whenever you want to make notes if you haven't been. So if you need to make the notes that I've gone through already, do pause the video. But the next thing to talk about is that we learn something in the next couple of lines about both the character of Capulet and Juliet. Capulet says, "My child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen the change of 14 years." And this shows us that Capulet does love his daughter, even though relationships were quite different between parents and children. Then Capulet really does love her. It also introduces us to the idea that Juliet is really young. And just another thing to make a note on is the theme of love. Paris is really being insistent here. You know, he feels that younger women than Juliet do get married, and it sounds more like a business negotiation. It's not about true love. He doesn't say, "I really love this girl and I want to be her husband." So it's also worth making a note for AO2 here, year 11. Two interesting words on this line are child and stranger. And both of those word choices really do remind us that Juliet is quite innocent, perhaps too young for these men to be discussing whether or not she's going to get married and get pregnant soon. Another very interesting choice here. This is the loving father Capulet referring to his daughter as not quite being ripe yet, but maybe she will be soon. Ripe makes it sound like fruit, like a product that's going to be bought or sold. Capulet's not saying, "No, I'm not going to arrange her marriage." He's just saying, well, maybe the product isn't ready yet. The last thing to make a note on these bits, year 11, is for AO3, which is context. And it's just worth making a note on the page to help your revision later in the year. But this was perfectly traditional. Girls were often married off to improve the status of their family. Men would want them to give them heirs, and so they were considered ready once they'd had their first period. That meant that they were able to have children, and you might as well just get them married ASAP. So when Paris gets insistent, Capulet then makes a very long speech, and you'll notice that it gets a bit more poetic here.
"And too soon marred are those so early made. The earth hath swallowed all my hopes, but she is the hopeful lady of my earth. But woo her, gentle Paris, get her part. My will to her consent is but a part. And she agree within her scope of choice lies my consent and fair accord in voice. This night I hold an old accustomed feast, whereto I have invited many a guest, such as I love, and you among the store. One more, most welcome, makes my number more."
He's saying here that he's actually thrown a party tonight, and he was already doing that, but he might as well invite Paris along. He says, "Many a guest such as I love, and you are among that store." So even though we've only just met these two guys, the audience is learning that for quite some time Capulet has really liked Paris and probably thought, "That's the best person to marry my daughter." This is a friendship that already exists, and Capulet really does think Paris is the best choice. He goes on.
"At my poor house look to behold this night, earth treading stars that make dark heaven light. Such comfort as do lusty young men feel, when well-apparelled April on the heel of limping winter treads, even such delight among fresh fennel buds shall you this night inherit at my house. Hear all see, and like her most whose merit most shall be, which on more view of many mine being one,
May stand in number, though in reckoning none. I've got a few more notes for you to add here to make this quite interesting. So first of all, there's a metaphor here. The earth have swallowed all of Capulet's hopes except Juliet. That means that Capulet's other children have died. It makes the ending even more tragic, the fact that Juliet's going to die. It also shows us that Juliet is very precious to her parents. She's their only daughter. But he also talks about hope. So let's add another note here, which is relevant to historical context. He uses the word hope and hopeful there. Juliet is also Capulet's only remaining opportunity to continue the bloodline and enhance the family status. So while he really does love her, she's also the only chance he has to actually make the right choice for marriage. So he doesn't want to mess it up. He needs it to be correct. Now, even though parents would ultimately tell their children, their daughters, "This is who we want you to marry," the young girl could still, at the wedding, in front of everyone, say, "No, I refuse." Okay? So to risk that not happening, the parents would still want the young woman to try her best to actually love the man. Now let's talk about a few different methods here. You'll notice that at this point where he says, "But woo her gentle Paris, get her heart," the lines begin rhyming in couplets. Now, when Shakespeare uses rhymed verse, it shows sincerity and importance. And so this next part, it shows that this really is very important to Capulet. What he's saying to Paris here means a lot to him and also to the story. A few more notes now for AO2. First of all, note down the repetition of the word consent. It really is important to Lord Capulet that his daughter Juliet does actually like Paris. He emphasises consent there, which is important. Also, an interesting note, in terms of structure, even though consent is important to Capulet, he mentions his will first, and that maybe reminds us that ultimately it will be up to him. His authority does come first in this situation. A bit further down then, we have lots of metaphors to describe the young women that will be at Capulet's feast. He's talking about how it's not just Juliet that's going to be there, but there is going to be a host of young, beautiful women. And this is two men here, maybe being a bit sexist, but perfectly normal for the time, focused only on looks. But he's saying, look, my daughter is beautiful, she lights up the earth, but so do all these other young women. Come and look at all of them. If you still want to marry Juliet when you've seen all the products available, then that'll be good. And he uses lots of imagery about heaven and earth, about light and darkness, and also about April and winter, which really does just emphasize how young women were viewed at the time. Their beauty just made life a lot better. There's another quite interesting metaphor a bit further down, where these young women are referred to as fresh fennel buds. Now, the plant fennel, its aroma was believed to be an aphrodisiac to really awaken passion, to make young men feel very passionate and aroused. But I think more interesting is that these young women have been referred to as fresh buds. It's a reminder of their virginity. They're still buds, they're still closed up. It's a very beautiful image, but it also maybe reminds us that these are really young women. And again, they're innocent and they're vulnerable. It might make us worry for Juliet. So you've made some brilliant notes there, Year 11. Really impressed. Final part of your homework. I'm not going to go on about this now. Pick any one of these questions, A through to E, just one, and write me a paragraph. Try to use a quotation to support your point, and just try to apply everything that we've been learning recently. If you can, try to make a link to the historical context. If you're talking about the character of Paris, don't say, oh, he's weird because he wants to marry a child, because even though we might think that, Paris would have represented a fairly normal, traditional man at the time. Okay, I've tried to make it so that question A is probably the most straightforward, and then it goes down in difficulty to question G, which I think is quite complex. I want you to pick your own level of challenge there, please, and do that in your exercise book. Okay, I want this video to not be too long, so I'm going to leave it there. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.